Hey guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today I'm coming at you with another legendary bullpup rifle, this time the Austrian Steyr AUG. So let's go ahead, talk about the history of the AUG, and get into how I have mine set up. Hey, real quick, I want to give a big thanks to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia. That's where I did the testing for this rifle and a bunch of matches over the years, so if you're in the DC metro area, check them out. So getting into the history of the Steyr AUG, we actually have to go back to the 1970s in Austria when they were looking for a replacement for the STG-58, which was an FAL variant chambered in 7.62 NATO. And this is about the time period where the US had adopted the M16 and other NATO countries were looking at going to a 5.56 caliber rifle. Now, saying that they were looking at a new caliber already, the Austrians decided that they would actually like a very modern rifle. So not just something chambered in 5.56, but something that had more modern features to it. And at the time, bullpups were really starting to catch on, at least in the kind of prototype areas. So you had the British working on what would eventually become the L85 or SA80, and the French working on what would eventually become the FAMAS. So at this time, the Austrians were working on what would eventually become the Steyr AUG. And considering this is one of the earliest adopted bullpups, if not the earliest, it's in competition mainly with the FAMAS for that title. We should talk about what makes bullpups so much better than just your standard configuration rifle with the magazine in front of the shooter's firing grip. And some of the main things are going to be the barrel length when compared to the overall length. So with something like the Steyr AUG, in the original adopted configuration, it had a 20-inch barrel. So same barrel length as the M16. However, it's over a foot shorter. So you get a much more compact rifle for the same barrel length. Now that being said, bullpups come with their own issues. So you do get a shorter overall length rifle. However, some of the things that start popping up are issues with left-handed shooters because the ejection port is so much further back. If you're left-handed, with most of those rifles, it's going to eject straight into your face. So they had to come up with a way to either have it eject from either side of the rifle, or in the case of the British L85, everyone just shoots right-handed no matter what. And additionally, bullpups can be a little bit more awkward when it comes to ergonomics than your standard configuration rifles. And there's some other considerations there too, particularly when getting to modern times and adding accessories. It's a lot more difficult and you have less rail space on a bullpup than you will with a standard rifle. So getting back into the AUG specifically, in 1977, after its whole development process, the Steyr AUG was adopted by the Austrian military as the Sturmgewehr 77 or the STG-77. Now the original STG-77 looks fairly similar to the rifle I have here today. The biggest differences were with the original AUG, the optic, so it had a 1.5 power integrated optic, which was actually forged into the receiver itself, while this on the A3M1, which is the version I have, has a removable optic on top. Additionally, it had a 20-inch barrel versus a 16-inch barrel that I have on my AUG. It came out with a couple of different versions of the AUG originally. One would be the heavy barrel or the H-bar, and this is what typically gets known as the AUG LMG or light machine gun. So that had a 24-inch barrel which had an integrated bipod, and then also had the option to convert it to open bolt so that it would work as a light machine gun or a light support weapon. And in 1988, they came out with the AUG Para, which is basically a Steyr AUG that's been converted to fire 9mm, so it's really cool bullpup submachine gun. Steyr also continued to do iterative design changes to the original AUG as well, and they came out in 1997 with the A2 version, which included a Picatinny rail instead of this optic setup here with the integrated 1.5 power optic. And the next model to come out after that is the A3 variant, which this is an example of, which went to a more modular receiver design where you could actually pop out 3 screws from the internals of the receiver. You could take off the optic, you could add a Picatinny rail of different varying lengths, and then additionally with at least the standard Steyr AUG magazine version of the stock, they also added a bolt release and bolt catch on the left side of the rifle. So if you can take a look here, this is going to be an integrated bolt release, which is something that wasn't included on the original AUG. They also changed the way that the forward assist worked on the AUG, with the original STG-77 models having a little button that you had to press down on the charging handle to connect it to the op rod, versus this newer model had the charging handle that you just press upwards to connect it with the guide rod for that. AUG is likely the most successful bullpup rifle in existence, being adopted by several major militaries other than just the Austrian one. So the next big year for the AUG was 1988, when it was adopted by 3 separate and fairly major militaries. The first being the Australians adopted the AUG as the F-88, and then we'll talk a little bit more about their timeline with that. Next up was going to be the New Zealand military. They adopted it, the Kiwis. Which makes sense considering the Australians adopted it, considering their proximity. And then the third major military to adopt it was the Irish military, also in 1988. So really big year for the AUG. The Australian story with the AUG is actually fairly interesting, and they knew it in their service as the Steyr, or Australian Steyr. Kind of makes sense there. But it went on its own development timeline with the Australian military. So they did iterative adjustments, so changing it out to like Picatinny rails, making NATO stocks that took Stanag magazines available, stuff like that, those kind of improvements over the years to it. And in the 2010s, they actually came out with their own upgraded version of the AUG, which took the basic mechanism of the AUG and upgraded it with a new stock that had better cooling as well as better optics integration, and that was known as the EF-88. And the improvements that they made with the EF-88 were eventually put on the export market for the Australian AUGs with the Lithgow F-90, which was eventually supposed to be coming to the US civilian market in the late 2010s. However, due to some political considerations and the Australian gun makers not really wanting to sell to the US civilian market, those never really made it here. Now, as far as its history on the US civilian market, the AUG goes back decades. So back in the 1980s, these were being imported into the US, and you'll still see pre-ban AUGs fairly frequently around. And those are the original version with the integrated optics, so really cool to get your hands on one of those. One other thing which is really cool with those original AUGs is they imported machine guns as well. So they have transferable AUGs on the market. So if you have the money and you want to get a machine gun version of the AUG, those are available. In 1989, unfortunately, the AUG was banned from import into the US. However, Steyr, going into the ban period, so 1994 to 2004 for the assault weapons ban in the US, they actually released the USR, which was kind of a dulled down version of the AUG. They actually added a thumbhole stock, the world's ugliest thumbhole stock. Took away scary features such as the threaded barrel and made it a heavy barrel. And it's one of the weirdest looking rifles that was on the market during the ban period. However, it did still come into the country. In 2007, Microtech Small Arms Research released the STG-556, which was a copy of the AUG, onto the US market. Now, this was the same Microtech that today is making knives, and they were back then too. But that was a copy of the Steyr AUG because there was no new Steyr AUGs coming out onto the market due to the import ban. In 2009, however, Steyr actually brought the AUG back to the US market by manufacturing it here in the US, which got rid of the importation issues. And that was the AUG A3. So this is an A3M1, so just a more updated version of that original A3. Now, just in the last year or two, Steyr has been very active with the AUG and coming out with new models. One would be the A3M2, which had some pretty minor updates to it, mainly having to do with the handguard and then a little bit of changes with the charging handle, but it wasn't a huge improvement over the M1. Additionally, they've been coming out with new calibers, the biggest one being 300 Blackout, and we've been seeing a resurgence in some of the other parts kits for like the Para AUG, so the 9mm version. We've been seeing those come to the US market, as well as some other aftermarket companies coming out with their own caliber conversion kits for the AUG. And that really brings us up to date with where we are with the AUG now. So let's go ahead, get in a close look at mine and see how I have it set up. Alright, so starting from the front, I do have a chemo muzzle device on here because I do run this rifle suppressed, which we will absolutely be getting into a little bit later on. And moving back, associated with that, I do have the gas plug. This is a suppressor gas plug for the AUG on there. And then we also have the classic AUG vertical grip, which does fold forward if you need it to. And then moving back from there, we do have the integrated 3-power optic that I have on mine. So you can see it does have pick rails on the top, as well as on the right side you have a little section of pick rail. Nothing too crazy to see. This does have the classic Donut of Death style reticle in it, but this is an upgraded version of that original 1.5 power optic. On the A3M1, you also have a small Picatinny rail here on the right side of the receiver. And then moving down from there, we do have our cutlass style grip and the trigger. The safety is a crossbolt style, which is right there. It's not my favorite feature in the world, but we'll talk about that later on. This is your takedown pin, so you'll press that across to disassemble the rifle. And then mine is also using the classic Steyr AUG waffle style magazines. There is a NATO stock, which we'll talk about later on, that takes Stannags. And there you can see the magazine release, which is this little paddle here at the end of the receiver. There's our ejection port, and it has a matching ejection port on the left side of the rifle, which is currently covered because this is right side eject for me. And moving back to the end of the receiver, nothing too crazy to see. And there we have our rubber butt plate. And checking out the left side of the rifle, you can just see our muzzle device, and then I went ahead and folded that vertical grip so you can see what it looks like in the stowed position up front here. And moving back, we have our charging handle there on the left side, which also works as a forward assist, and then you can also put it up in a little notch back here, so kind of like an HK, although there's not a lot of room, so you're not doing the HK slap with it. Down at the bottom here, you can see this little button, which has a kind of cam track there. That's part of the removal process for the barrel. This has the fastest change barrel out of any rifle that I'm really currently aware of, which I'll demonstrate a little bit later on in the disassembly for that. Now we have our pistol grip back here as well as the safety, and you can see right there it does have marks on the safety, red for dead, white for safe. And moving back, we just have that disassembly lever again. And then on the A3 version of the AUG with the standard Steyr magazines, you do have this bolt catch, bolt release, which is a really nice feature on the left side of the rifle. And then up here you can see the cover, which covers up the left side ejection port with a very, very nice fun warning on it. So if you really want to read that, go ahead. And then moving back here, we do have our left side sling swivel, which also is the takedown pin for the butt pad back here to get your trigger grip out. And that's really all we have to see on the left side. Let's kick off the ratings with accuracy, where the AUG is going to score a 3. Using 55 grain M193 ammunition, I was able to get a group of about 2.8 MOA at 100 yards with the AUG, which isn't the greatest group, but with ball ammunition, that's definitely a serviceable group. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the AUG is basically all the 5.56 ones from the factory come with a 1 in 9 twist barrel, so with your heavier 75 or 77 grain ammunition, you might see some stability issues. Next up, we have aftermarket support for the AUG, where I'm going to give it a 4, and there's quite a bit to go over with this rifle because there's actually a fair amount of aftermarket support for it. So first up, Steyr makes a ton of different parts and conversion kits for this rifle, as well as left-handed bolts, so you could swap to left-hand eject with the AUG magazine. They also make the NATO stocks for these, which take Stanag style magazines. However, those are only right-hand eject. And with the newer versions of those NATO stocks, they also have the bolt catch, bolt release, although the early ones don't have that, so you have to load it by running the charging handle. They've also started coming out with different handguard types, different optics rails, stuff like that, so there are options there. Next up, Mannlicher Arms makes a ton of parts for the AUG. Main thing is like 2 different types of charging handles. One's a folding one, the other one is at a lower angle. Other stuff are going to be some rail options for this, so you can add M-lock to it, so swap out this original foregrip, which is absolutely classic. And then also different types of optic mounts, so if you want to put a scope on this, you can do that. They have 30mm mounts, as well as I believe some other ones as well, so that is an option to swap out on this rifle. One of the biggest names in the AUG game is going to be Corvus Defensio. So they are a European company, and some of the parts they make are brass deflector for the AUG, which is kind of a big deal. There's no brass deflector on it, so you end up dinging up your stock by shooting it. I don't really care about that, but they do make a brass deflector for it. They also make different Picatinny rails for the AUG, as well as some rails and a mag release as well, since this is pretty small and hard to hit for the stock one. Heresy Design is one of the cooler new companies that are making parts for the AUG. The biggest thing they make are caliber conversion kits. So if you want a 300 blackout kit, they make those. And the coolest ones, in my opinion, are the 9mm kits. So you can swap to a 9mm barrel. It comes with the barrel, as well as a new bolt carrier group, essentially, since it converts it to straight blowback. And then it actually used like a mean arm style of magazine, so an original AUG magazine with a 9mm insert in it. So that's a really cool upgrade to this rifle. And then there's also Underworld Arms, who makes another handguard M-lock for this rifle, as well as Titan Tactical, which they make a couple of different parts. They make different rails that you can add to the gas block, as well as to the lower receiver. The side rail here you can actually swap out for a Surefire Pro mount or an M-lock mount, so that's kind of a cool upgrade for this rifle. And then you also have Arid USA is making an upgraded trigger for the AUG, which is really kind of necessary for this rifle since it doesn't have a great trigger from the factory. Next up, we have durability, where I'm going to give the AUG a 3. Now, one of the biggest issues that has kind of popped up in the last couple of years has been issues with the stock cracking. So this would be right in front of the disassembly block here in the receiver. There will be a crack that would eventually form fairly quickly in the receiver, which is a major issue. From what I understand, though, Steyr's pretty good about replacing those stocks, and those were mainly with runs from the early 2020s. And from what I hear nowadays, that problem has largely been solved. My rifle's from around 2018, 2019, so I haven't had that issue, but it has been something that's popped up. One other thing I want to kind of hit on a little bit is the finish on the US-made receiver is not my favorite. So this is an aluminum receiver with steel inserts for the bolt to ride in. It is an anodized receiver from what I can tell. However, the finish is not great, and it has worn off in a couple of areas in ways that are kind of unusual to me. It doesn't hold up that well, and it rubs off fairly easily. Another thing is with the charging handle slot. It's one of the rougher components of the receiver. The charging handle, especially early on when you first get the rifle, is fairly rough feeling inside of the receiver, and that's due to the aluminum material. So it's aluminum on aluminum contact from the looks of it, which really just makes it feel kind of like it's grinding together. So that's one area where I'm going to hit it as well. Other thing I want to mention for durability is one issue I had was the plate here, which covers the left side ejection port. I've had issues in the past with this coming off randomly while I was shooting the rifle, so this would pop off the side of the rifle. It's not easy to put back on there, but that is something to keep in mind that can happen and has happened to me. Next up, we have ergonomics, where I'm going to go ahead and give the AUG a score of 3. So let's go ahead and start from the front here with our gas plug. And this is a 3-position gas plug with normal, adverse, and grenade settings for the original gas plug. This is a suppressor one, so it replaces the grenade with a suppressor setting, and then to adjust it you have to pull up on it and then rotate it. Your butt pad pin actually acts as a tool for this if it gets carboned up, so you can still turn it. Your foregrip up here, so this is a classic AUG foregrip. To put it forward, all you have to do is pull down on it and then press it forward, and it'll go ahead and lock in that forward position. You actually don't have to pull down on it to deploy it again. You can just pull it straight down and it'll lock into position there. Now moving back, and I'll go ahead and flip us over here, you have our charging handle, which for the AUG A3M1, this actually acts as a forward assist as well. So if I go ahead and drop the bolt back here, to use it as a forward assist, if it's a little bit out of battery, you actually lift up on it and then press forward, and it'll go ahead and push your bolt all the way into battery. Now it also has an HK style lock open notch right here, so if you push all the way back and then rotate it up into that notch, you can go ahead and lock it open that way. To deploy it at that point, you actually just press down on it. Not a lot of room though, so you're not going to be doing the classic HK slap. And while we have the bolt back here, I'll go ahead and demonstrate the barrel, the quick change barrel mechanism. So to pull the barrel, crazy easy on the AUG. All I gotta do is hit this little nub here. So go ahead and rotate it. Your barrel will turn, and then it'll pop right out the front of the rifle. So you can go ahead and do the whole classic die-hard thing and pull your barrel, be a cool guy, and go ahead and reinstall it there. Really easy to do, not tough at all. Moving back, the thing that I really don't like about the AUG is going to be the safety selector. So it's just a cross bolt safety on either side of the rifle here. For the military AUG, which is full auto, these have a progressive trigger, so you pull it halfway back and it's semi-auto, and then if you go ahead and pull it all the way back, that's in full auto. So that's why I had the cross bolt safety. Still not the greatest in the world. and actually a little bit sharp here, so it will cut into your trigger finger just a little bit. Now moving back here on the A3M1 with the standard AUG stock, I do have a bolt catch, bolt release, so you can see the bolt is open here on this side. If you press up on that, it'll go ahead and send your bolt home there. And then if we even pull the magazine, so here's the magazine release, which is kind of awkward and right behind the magazine. It's fairly small too, so a little bit difficult to hit if you're trying to go quickly. But going back to the bolt catch, if I go ahead and press the charging handle back and you press on the lower portion here, it will lock your bolt back as well. So that is another cool option, and that really covers most of the ergonomic features on the AUG. And next up we have maintenance, where I'm going to give the AUG a perfect 5. As far as disassembly goes, it comes apart very, very easily with mainly just that one pin in the receiver. You can pull everything apart. Pulling the barrel on the AUG is famously easy to do, and it gives you fantastic access to be able to clean your barrel. You get great access to the trunnion as well, so you can clean out your bolt recesses, pretty much everything. The bolt carrier group, when it comes out, is very, very easy to clean and disassemble as well. And then you don't really have to clean any springs in here. They're actually integrated into the bolt carrier itself, so that's really, really nice and easy to maintain. And as far as getting replacement parts for the AUG, they have most of the replacement parts available on Steyr's website in the US, so you really have full access to be able to maintain your rifle. Another thing is going to be the trigger group. That's going to pull out the stock here, and that's, again, something that's very, very easy to maintain. It is made out of polymer, which is kind of interesting, but you have full access to that as well. And next up we have modularity, where I'm going to give the AUG a perfect 5. Now when it comes to different stock options for the AUG, you're not actually going to have a lot of different aftermarket stocks you can add onto this. However, you can swap to the NATO style stock, which allows it to use standard STANAG style magazines. Now, as far as the barrels and conversions go, this is absolutely fantastic. You can swap the barrel for 9mm, you can go 300 blackout. There are options out there. Lengths, you can go to the 20-inch, you can go to the 24-inch with an integrated bipod. So you have a lot of different options with this rifle. One place where it's not the most modular, but the aftermarket has really caught up with it, is going to be in the handguard. So this originally has this vertical foregrip on here. There are quite a few companies now that are making replacements for this, so you can add an M-lock foregrip to this and give you a little bit more rail space here. And then with the A3 variant of the AUG, being able to swap out this optic for any number of different lengths of Picatinny rail, so you can add scopes of whatever type you want. You can add scope rings to it. It's very modular for a modern rifle. And then there are newer trigger options to be able to swap out the original not so great trigger to something that's going to be a little bit smoother than stock. One other thing I wanted to show you guys was an AUG magazine. So these are the standard magazine for the original AUG. And these are the classic waffle pattern magazines, which are translucent, so you can see how many rounds that you have in the magazine. These come in, I believe, 10-round variants, the 30-round one that you see here, as well as a longer 42-round variant that was originally meant for the LMG version of the AUG. So those are your options there. These are good magazines. They're not the most durable ones in the world. Their translucent magazines tend to have some durability issues, but these actually hold up fairly well. Another option, though, if you want a really durable magazine, is Magpul makes a AUG magazine, which is the same style of construction as a standard PMag. These are very, very high quality. They work incredibly well, and they do feature a window in the magazine so you can see how many rounds you have left, but these are another great option if you want something that's a little bit more durable than the original waffle mags. And next up we have price, where I'm going to give it a 3, coming in at around $1,800 for a new Steyr AUG. When it comes to shooting characteristics, I'm going to go ahead and give the AUG a 3. Now, as far as the trigger goes, it is a bullpup, so you can expect it to have a fairly bad trigger. It weighs in at about 8 pounds, sometimes a little bit over, and there is quite a bit of travel to it. It is slightly spongy, but it's actually not all that bad. I complain about it quite a bit, but there are definitely worse bullpup triggers out there. Now, as far as the recoil impulse goes for the AUG, it is fairly sharp for whatever reason. It might be slightly overgassed, but you can definitely feel more recoil than you can with most 5.56 rifles. So that is something to be aware of with this. And then as far as being a suppressor host goes, the AUG is probably the worst suppressor host I own as far as guns I actually use with a can. So even with the suppressor plug on this thing, it is not great. Some of that comes from the sound of the rifle. So the gas plug up here produces a lot of piston pop, so it is still a loud gun no matter what you do. That is probably even worse with the suppressor plug, honestly. The way the suppressor plug works is it allows more gas to vent out of the piston area, so it reduces the bolt velocity in that way. One thing to note with the way it vents the gas, it actually vents it straight down onto your finger with the way the vertical grip is here, which doesn't hurt. It's something that you notice while you're shooting it, but you will have a little black mark on your finger when you're using this gun suppressed with the suppressor gas plug. So that is something to be aware of there. It is definitely better with a lower back pressure can. With my original Circa 7.62 can, which is a full back pressure, you can tell the bolt is moving very quickly, so you can see there's a pretty big jump in the recoil impulse using that can on there. But moving to my B&T SRBS 7.62, it's definitely quite a bit smoother. You'll see the ejection pattern is a little bit more stable and closer to 90 degrees than anything else. However, you can still tell it's a fairly violent rifle and is going to be quite loud. When it comes to reliability, I'm going to give the AUG a perfect 5. I've never had any sort of malfunction with this rifle. It's been incredibly reliable for me, probably because it is a little bit overgassed, but I've never really had an issue with it. When it comes to weight, I'm going to go ahead and give the AUG a 3 because it weighs in at about 7.3 pounds. Now that's going to be the version with a Picatinny rail up top. My model here with the integrated 3-power scope is going to be closer to 8 pounds, so you're going to gain a little bit of weight there, but at the same time you're also getting a 3-power scope, so that kind of evens out. And it's not the heaviest rifle in the world, and being a bullpup also brings the center of gravity to the back and makes it actually easier to carry for longer periods. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories, the Steyr AUG gets a score of 37, which puts it up in the A tier. Now, some of the things I really like about the AUG are going to be its aftermarket support. There's a lot of options, and that goes along with its modularity, so you can swap to different calibers, different handguards, stuff like that. There are options with the AUG out there. Now, where it really gets let down, though, is the shooting characteristics, and especially when you're talking about the Steyr AUG as a suppressor host, it's not great, and it does have a stiffer recoil than most 5.56 rifles, but overall it is still one of the better bullpups on the US market. And the final thing I'll talk about is where I think the AUG belongs as far as the cool tier goes, and it's going straight up in the S tier because of course it has to. The AUG is one of the most iconic rifles in history, and in the 20th century, the late 20th century, this was very prominent in action movies. So thinking back to like Commando, this was one of the really cool futuristic looking rifles. In Die Hard, Carl using this rifle and putting that quick change barrel in there, that is one of the most iconic moments in all of movie firearms history. This also popped up in like The Running Man and a bunch of movies in the late 80s and the 90s as well, because this rifle was one of the most futuristic looking rifles at the time and still is to this day, for being a 70s rifle, one of the coolest looking rifles out there. And it doesn't just stop with movies either. In video games, the AUG is featured prominently as well. So of course in the Call of Duty series, so original Black Ops all the way up to the games today, that you see the AUG fairly frequently because it is a very cool looking rifle. And the best thing I think about that is you see in its different forms as well. So you see it in its LMG form, as well as its pistol caliber form, and its standard rifle form. You also see it in like the Rainbow Six games and in Battlefield games. This is featured fairly prominently across the board in video games. Alright guys, and that's going to do it for my review on the Steyr AUG. So thank you for checking out the video. Please like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And I'll have more content coming out in the near future on more cool rifles.